This is Karina, and you're listening to Bold, Brown and British, a weekly podcast where we discuss what it means to be a brown person in a Western world. We've spoken about colorism, third culture identity, and dating, amongst many others in this podcast. So if this sounds like the type of content that you want to hear, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts from. You can also message us on Instagram. The handle is @BoldBrownAndBritish, or drop us an email via our website at www.boldbrownbritish.com. So without further ado, let's get on with this week's episode. Good morning, everyone. How's it going?
Morning.
Morning.
As we're recording this, it's 26 degrees at 9 a.m. on a Saturday. So what a great way to start the weekend, right? This all kind of came through a new legislation, or rather overturning of a law in the US. So just for a bit of context, Roe versus Wade, which was a legal case in the US Supreme Court in January 1973, ruled that unduly restrictive regulation of abortion was unconstitutional. So the court held that a set of Texas statutes criminalizing abortion in most cases violated a woman's right of privacy. But this legal case was overturned by the Supreme Court in 2022. So the Supreme Court disagreed with Roe's assertion of an absolute right to terminate pregnancy in any way and at any time, and attempted to balance a woman's right of privacy with the state's interest in regulating abortion. In the opinion that only a quote, compelling state interest justifies regulations limiting, in the original one, fundamental rights such as privacy, and legislatures must therefore draw statutes narrowly to express only legitimate state interests at heart. It is worth saying, however, that abortions in the UK is still legally available through the Abortion Act in 1967 and the Abortion Northern Ireland No. 2 regulations in 2020. It's carefully worded because there probably have been and will be further assaults in abortion law following the landmark of Roe versus Wade ruling in the US. And I think what most women in the UK don't realize is abortion is not actually a right here, but it's a law that gives exemption from prosecution in certain circumstances. So what the US teaches us is that I think that we can't be necessarily complacent about whether or not entrenching those rights in law are okay or not. There's kind of three schools of thought. Well, there's two, and then there's kind of the person in the middle who's trying to figure it out and where they stand. So there's two schools of people, and chief positions on the morality of abortion can be summarized by a pro-life position or a pro-choice position. The basic pro-life position holds that induced abortions are morally permissible, so they're wrong, they're prohibited, whatever word you want to say. And the pro-choice position holds that induced abortions are permissible, so they're not wrong morally. I want to kind of start on this idea of the capability of the meaning of life, or the viability of life as we speak, moral, physical, or metastatus of an embryo. At what point do you think it becomes life?
Start with a deep question, why don't you?
Yeah, sorry.
Well, I think going to your question, to me, I mean, I'm not a scientist, first of all, so maybe I don't know everything and my view might change, but I would think if there's potential of life, then that is life. I've heard scientifically, they say, it's not really alive or conscious or whatever, the baby is not there until certain weeks after it's been kind of fertilized. But I would say, from my personal belief, is that if there's potential of life, then that is life, because at one point I was that egg that was fertilized with the sperm. So
yeah, so
if I was aborted, I wouldn't be here right now. That's, I guess, generally that's my point of view, or as in that's kind of where I'm tending towards. Like, I'm pretty flexible on my views might change, but I would say I would want to ask the question, why is it okay that we have a blanket rule to say it's okay to like abort a baby when like a potential life is what I'm trying to say. Because in my opinion, that is a potential life when.
Yeah, so scientifically speaking, an egg becomes fertilized within 24 hours. 6 weeks is when you can feel transmitted what you could call or would transform into brain waves. 8 weeks is when the embryo starts actually swimming, so it stops being a static cell, so to speak, and it actually starts swimming. And then capability of life outside of the womb or viability is at 24 weeks of pregnancy. So if you're saying a potential of life is life, then does that mean, for example, what, the morning after pill, the plan B, which you can take up to 72 hours, I think, is still wrong?
That's such a good point. Such a good question.
So what does the pill do? So the pill, does that just kill?
It prevents, or
it would bring on like a period and shed the lining of the uterus.
Right. And that could have been potential life.
It would be, yeah.
I would tend towards, that the same point of view of, that in my opinion because the potential of life is there, you are kind of eliminating it. My general view would be, maybe that's probably not a good idea. I don't know. Like it's not a simple. These topics are like quite complex. Like what I don't understand is why people are so on one side or the other side. It's confusing. Like, when is life? When is it okay to terminate that life? But I still have that. I'm still tending towards the view of, if there's potential, you are eliminating it, and that could have been me, that could have been you, that could have been anyone. So would we want that to happen, given that we've developed and we're all alive right now?
I was just about to add, I think it's really important to say here that when a woman becomes pregnant, we know, like whatever has just been said, in a sense, there is potential of life. And we know that really deep down in our core. And taking a decision to have an abortion is very, very complex. It's because that we know that there is that potential. It's rather what's going to happen afterwards or during that leads to the decision. So it's not very black and white. It's very, very mentally taxing for women to have to even sit there and think about the decision, because to us it already is kind of a baby. We have to kind of weigh up what it is that's going to happen to us, because we're the ones that have to carry, we're the ones that have to go through everything, and fundamentally our lives change more. And how are you going to manage that afterwards? Are you going to be able to? But I think we'll obviously talk about that.
Yeah, because from the get-go, biologically, it's a woman's life that changes much more than the guys, right? Because you're carrying the baby, it is inside you. And as a result, biologically, you will go through changes. What I was also going to say, though, is this idea of like, it's a potentiality of life. And every time someone has said that to me, I've been like, okay, well, then why do you wear a condom? Because that could be a potentiality of life. And where do you draw the potentiality of life at that point then?
No, but so the sperm is alive, but it doesn't, once it's fertilized an egg, that's the potential of that developing into a human being, right? Because you're going to, even if you don't have sex or anything, your sperm is constantly being generated. The eggs are still there, unfertilized, but there's nothing you can do about that. So like, even if you don't have sex, like, you're going to have the sperm. And there is responsibility on the man also to, like, it's not like I'm saying men can just do whatever they want. And then if you do have sex with someone, then it's potential of life, and the woman has to like deal with it, just have a baby. Like, no, men are also responsible for the fact that you've taken this action, and deal with the consequences if the baby, like if there is a baby. With the condom argument, I think, you're preventing, using that, you're preventing the fertilization to happen. But with the pill, it's a different thing because it's already happened, potentially.
I think what's been very very apparent in when all of this has come out is that, in my view, men have actually been, or maybe for a long time, men have been very quiet about abortion, but they are kind of maybe not equally affected, but they are affected as well. And ultimately, you can't get pregnant without a man. So I feel like a lot of men could probably take, or should take, much more responsibility in what they're doing and what happens. And it's quite disheartening when you don't see men or hear men talking in a supportive way around this, or just keeping quiet, even, because women are then left feeling like, well, we're just alone in this, when it's actually a man that has got them into this position.
I think the modern day sort of society is more like it's kind of geared towards, oh yeah, just like have sex, go out there, have sex, do whatever, like, have fun, wear condoms, take the pill. I don't know, like, I don't know if that's good for us. Is it, like, it might be fine for some people, but I think the emphasis should be more on, you can have a bit of fun when you're growing up, but like there are consequences to this, like to having sex, not even just having the baby. Like, it's like you could spread diseases, and it's a deep thing. It's meant to be a spiritual, deep thing for some people. And I think we lack that now in the modern age, we've lacked that. And it's in media, like, you just see that it's cool to have sex all the time, 24/7, and have abortions and have, do this and that and everything. But like, really should be looking to settle down with one person and plan, like, let's have a baby or not, or whatever, and like try to do things with responsibility, both the man and the woman. I think that should be focused on. So like, even the pill's not good for women. Like, why take something that's not good for you? And
yeah, I would agree with that. Definitely, it's gotten a bit, it gets a bit out of hand these days.
To take it back to the abortion debate itself, I of course, men should be aware of it, but I don't know if it's a complicated one, because you think, given that this affects a woman's body completely, should men have a say in this, in whether a woman gets an abortion or doesn't?
I think men should have a say, because they should take responsibility of the consequences of that. Like, I mean, if, like, say you were with your girlfriend or whatever, and like you ended up having a baby unplanned, then the man should be there for it. Like, I don't know, take care. Like, if the woman has this baby, you might have to be there for it. So like, I think men should men should have a say. And also because the baby is not the child that comes out of this, but the potential child can be male or female. So it's a human thing to like just have an opinion on it. And
I agree with that. I think, yes, men, I don't think anyone's, at least here on this call, is disagreeing that men shouldn't take responsibility, but there's no real law holding a guy accountable. Whereas once you've given birth, what next? Like, a guy could, and I'm not saying that they should, but a guy, or that they even do, but a guy can just walk away if you don't have what's called legal rights, in terms of if you're not married, if you're not in a civil partnership, or, if you're not necessarily bound by that, what, apart from morality and their choice, what's holding a guy accountable?
Yeah, that's right. Because again, with abortion rights itself, all of the abortion laws talk about women, because of course the woman carries the baby, but there is nothing there that talks about what happens after birth, whether it's for the woman or the man. There's nothing about sort of after birth care. So when we have these conversations, choice of pro-life, there's an element lacking, I think, in terms of, do people have sex, woman gets pregnant, should they have a right to terminate the pregnancy or not? is that morally right, etc., etc. But we don't look at, well, what if they have this baby, but let's say they can't afford to raise a child, or they're living in an impoverished area where that child is not going to have a good life. We don't talk about that. Where, or even, right, is the other parent going to be around? There is no legal enforcement of providing for that child and raising that child properly by either party, and especially by the father.
I think for most people, that is probably the ultimate thing, isn't it? Because there's none of that. That's when we first get pregnant. That's what we have to weigh up. We have to look that far in the future and see how far ahead this is going to actually go. And then for this child's life, for the rest of their life, what kind of quality are you going to give it? It's not like you're saying, I'm having an abortion. I've woken up today. I want to have an abortion. No woman has ever gone about saying, like, I don't care about this. I'm just going to go do this today. It's like a really deep thought process of all of these things that we're talking about, and knowing what you're about to do, and knowing that actually you can't give someone a good life if in fact you could actually end up having a worse off life for all parties involved. Anyone that I've spoken to and all the stories that I've heard, anyone that's had an abortion, they will still think about that child probably every day and wonder about what could have been and what could have happened. There's no way that anyone thinks that, this is what I want to do. No woman on earth actually wants to genuinely happily go and have an abortion. It's like a really tough, horrible choice that some of them have to make.
Yeah, and also I think it's pain, depending on when you're terminating the pregnancy. It can be really painful. Like, it's a physical, it's not just an emotional thing. It's a very physical, potentially painful procedure to go through, regardless of whether you do it medically or surgically. Yeah, I think the implications and considerations are so high, and I don't know. I'm thinking about the question of, should men have a say in this at all? And I think that's a really interesting question to ask, because I'm kind of in both schools of thought on that.
I'm a bit similar in that as well, because at the end of the day, it's part of both of the female and the male, isn't it? It's part of you too. And, men, they don't carry a child, but they can be attached to it as soon as they know it's, a possibility. There's love that's there probably. So I don't believe it's an easy decision for some men either. For a lot, maybe it is just like, oh, just get rid of it, whatever, for those that are unfortunate enough to be with somebody like that. But I don't doubt it's a tough decision on their side too.
Do you then think that with the laws that have been overturned, do you think the fundamental thing that's wrong here is it's looking at the life of the potential life or life of the embryo and the future child, but not necessarily the rights of the woman?
Yeah, that's what's really the question, isn't it? Because in some sense, it could be like, if you're pro-life, what about the life that's already existing? And all of the children that are already born that don't have a good life due to not being aborted. I mean, that's probably not a great way of talking about that in that sense. But yeah, it's like, what quality of life does the woman herself have?
So yeah, I was just thinking about what you guys were talking about, and like the earlier point of, like, is a really valid point of like this is a thing. This is the whole process is what the woman goes through. So yeah, like it does kind of make sense that they should have more say in what happens in this, like, on this topic, because they are the ones who are bearing the child and, like, going through the whole physical process. And also, you're right that there is nothing holding the man accountable for this. And I don't know where I stand on that. Like, as in, I personally, I think the man should take responsibility, but I don't know if that's something the government should enforce, because I'm not down with that also. Like, I just think they interfere so much anyway in our lives. And I think we as individuals should be able to, like, make a lot of these decisions. But also, like, with this,
the government have a lot of say already in people's lives. They have a lot of say in women's lives.
Everyone's lives.
Yeah, probably more women than men.
In what way?
In the terms of maybe what we're discussing, definitely in the US, after what's just happened. So it's kind of like we have actually been dealing with this stuff.
Oh yeah. So the other thing I was going to say was like, what is the quality of the child's life? Also, like women have to consider these things, like, and even men, I guess, if like they're part of the decision to take the abortion, have to consider like, oh, can we take care of this child? What life will they have? What life am I going to have? Like, I'm going to have to like change my whole plan. And, there's a lot to consider, but the child that is born from this, can they be given to adoption? Is that like a possibility? Because if I was the child, I'd rather be alive, to be honest, and be adopted, because they still have lives. And I know of people who have kind of gone through that, and they're completely fine, and they're contributing to society, and they have great lives. They just happen to have been given up to adoption, and they got really good foster parents or whatever, and they probably didn't even know they were adopted for a while, and then they figured out when they were older that, oh yeah, I have a biological mom or something. Now they have two moms because they've actually gone back and contacted their biological mom. But there's so many possibilities, and why do we want to eliminate the possibilities of human life and all the beauty and the creativity that comes out of it? It's not nice when it's unplanned, and yes, you have to go through pain, and that's not fair. That is the women that have to bear the burden. And I think men should do something also, like, take responsibility. Don't take sex so lightly. At the end of the day, do you want to eliminate that potential life and creativity, or do you want that to flourish? And like, you don't have to take care of it yourself. You can give it up to adoption.
That in some ways is a good point, but then a woman still has to go through the pregnancy, give birth, and then you're asking her, and then she has to make a decision to give it away. That's a really tough decision to make.
Because even if that person knew they had to give up, even when they have surrogate mothers, right, surrogate pregnancies, this person knows that they are growing a child inside them to then away, but that doesn't make it any harder to give the child away, even if you've been paid to basically grow a child inside of you. So, let alone then, and in that case, where the child is going, who the child is going to. Whereas in the case where you get pregnant and for a fact you cannot raise this child, you cannot give the child a good life, and why would you still go put yourself through that emotionally and physically, go through the whole pregnancy, give birth, and then have to try and find adoptive parents? This is much easier to say than to do. And also, given all the complications that can arise from pregnancy, a woman's body and psyche is not the same after giving birth than before. So if that person knows already they're going to give up that child, why should they have to carry that child? Why shouldn't they get a choice in that it is their body? And
does the child have a choice? Because like I said, I know people who have gone through that, and they're like adults now. So like, when you look at it from that point of view, this is a potential life. Like, this could be one of us. Would we have the choice? I'd rather have the choice of being alive.
Yeah, but it's a potential choice versus an actual person that is alive. It's like saying that it's like the potential of an earthquake versus like, oh, this person could have an earthquake, so we'll put the aid there, versus, oh, they are having an earthquake, but they could have an earthquake, so we'll just put the rights there and the laws there to protect the potential earthquake. But fuck the people that are actually having the earthquake now.
Prioritizing the wrong thing. We should prioritize the person who could potentially be in immediate danger here, and that is the expectant mother.
But that's also potential. You don't know if that. There's a lot of births that happen, and it's fine.
There are also a lot that happen that are not fine, and there's a risk in like thinking, oh, you could even choose people that are great, but you don't know what's going to happen down the line. And there are also implications for some people who have been adopted and then can't figure themselves out afterwards, or yearn for something else like their true parents, or like feel all sorts of things. This is so complicated and complex.
I would rather be alive, to be honest.
No, that's cool. That's fair for
That's just my opinion. That
Yeah.
I could have been in that situation, and I would rather have life, whether or not it's with my adopted parent. Like, I have my own traumas from a normal childhood, a really good childhood.
Yes,
But,
we all, yeah.
Yeah,
We all
so
have
like
trauma
that potential is always there, but I'd rather have the traumas and be alive and have potential to do good things in the world than to have just been terminated.
Okay,
that's true. I suppose you can't. I think you can't put your own personal view onto someone else to influence their decision in it.
Okay, but also, I think that this, like, I'd rather be alive. I get that. I understand that. But for example, it's the only metaphor I can think of the top of my head. It's like saying, okay, well, so there's this person who needs a blood transfusion. Would you give up all your blood because that's a potential of this person could be the next president, the next prime minister? It's going to affect your life drastically. Yeah, you might have to, live on transplants, or or maybe organ donation. Would you give both your kidneys? Yeah, you'll have to go to dialysis every month, for example.
I don't think that's a fair comparison.
It is, though.
It is
because you're talking about bodily, physical changes that are often
what's
irreversible.
The percentage of women that after giving birth have no kidneys or are on dialysis?
Okay, they don't have, it's not about the physical of whether they have kidneys or not. There are irreversible biological changes
and mental changes.
I think all of this highlights the responsibility of just everyone, human beings, men and women. Sex is a big deal. Do not do sex. Do not have sex. Like, we need more education around this, and like more like a shift in culture, because like it's a huge thing. This is like a life or death situation. So like make sure you're with someone that you're prepared for the consequences.
Okay, I agree with that. Then put laws around sex. Why put laws around abortion? If that's the case, fine. Why not? Why are we not putting laws around?
Yeah, maybe I kind of agree with that. That there should be, if there's any laws here, there should be more towards that side of things
before pregnancy even happens.
Yeah.
And also, for example, if we're saying, and I mean, I'm definitely not saying, but for argument's sake, if we're saying that an embryo is the potential of life, and thus the embryo has rights in its own, it is a life, then why is childcare not paid on that? Why can I not take out life insurance of my embryo? Why do I have to live on, for example, if I'm a single mom, why do I have to live on one income and not get any benefits from it? Why can I not take out life insurance in case I have a miscarriage, in case something happens to the child? Why does, like we were saying, why will the guy not be liable to pay for that child's, health being as it is in the womb? If it is in the womb and it is alive, why are there no more laws around protecting that in a more practical sense? And I think also it's slightly off topic but related. If we're saying that every life is important, which I agree with, life is important. If every life is important, why are not more effort not being put on suicide prevention or people that are going through severe mental, physical disadvantages? Why is it only important when it comes to a woman's rights? But fuck all other lives. Yeah, we'll deal with it later.
We're legislating, if we're going to, like they're doing in America, if they're going to legislate that women have to have a child, then they should also be legislating that the state should provide for that child if the parent or parents cannot provide. If you're going to force a woman to have the child, then the state should provide if that parent can't provide, because otherwise, if you're not giving them the choice, because abortions don't just happen in like to potential single moms, or in extreme cases of like sexual assault or whatever. It people who are in loving relationships also have abortions for various reasons. And a lot of the time it is to do with whether they can afford to have a child or whether their circumstances allow them to have a child. But if we're going to force even those people to have a child while they know their circumstances won't allow them to give that child a good life, then the state that's forcing that onto them must also provide. Because then the state has a responsibility, because it's the state that's forcing you to continue the pregnancy. And even if you are careful with, contraception, etc., there is still a risk. So it's not just in cases where, people are being, are having casual sex or whatever, that they might get pregnant and might want an abortion. It even happens to people who are together in great relationships. They just don't have the wherewithal to raise a child. And I don't think
I agree.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it does happen. And I think we also can't go around saying just don't have sex, because that's a very human way to connect to your partner or whoever you're with. And abortion, whether you like it or not, has been around for like centuries, and still from the beginning of time, probably. So there have been ways of, if you can't have a child, to let it go naturally. But you can always honor that as well. It's not saying that you just don't value the life. It just means that that the life won't be sustainable for the future.
And I think also it brings into question this idea of legitimate reason, as in there are certain things that I think we all would agree would be legitimate reasons, things like assault or forceful pregnancy to, in that way. Fair enough, underage. These are all things I think most people or most moral people will, agree with. However, it becomes blurry, because what about people, or, what about the potential impairment or genetic conditions of a child? If you then find out if your child is going to be born with, for example, Down syndrome, is that a legitimate interest to terminate a pregnancy? If you find out, I can't remember what the condition's called, where, a child or an embryo develops without, I think it's lungs, or without a vital organ, it means that, yes, they will be born, yes, that will be life, but they'll only be alive for 30 minutes or a very short period of time. I think that if you're taking away the choice of, in those circumstances, you're going through, like, yes, it's traumatic for the woman, but just forget, if this was a loving, healthy partnership, imagine what you're putting that couple through. You're making them grow attached to this child, this idea, knowing that this is not going to have a life, knowing that this child of theirs is not going to survive. So they're going to have to prepare a funeral and a birth all at the same time. That's two forms in one, often within half an hour. You're seeing your child cry and then not. Grief and loss of child is so awful that, the people that I've seen go through it, again, as Lena was saying, they grieve about it for years, if not forever. And it affects that child, that time, that child, but also potential children. I think that the lack of choice and the blurriness about legitimate interests becomes really dangerous.
I think exceptions should be made for the scenarios that you mentioned, and I think that, but like, I think with that, there needs to be clear guidelines and information based on science, maybe, that, like, yeah, this child is not going to make it for long, or what criteria are we using to, like, determine whether or not it's worth them being alive or not? Like, I think, to me, that's like a super gray area. Like, I mean, sometimes it's clear, I guess, in the scenario that you mentioned, that where, like, if they're only going to live for like 30 minutes or whatever, like, or a couple of days or whatever, like, if their life is, like, severely
you say that's a super clear, but that might not be, because I know both sides of that argument. I know people that have, taken it to full term because they're like, that's not my decision to make, and that has vital organs, that has the viability of surviving even for a short time outside of the womb, and thus, religiously I've left it up to God, Allah, or whatever you want to call it. And then I've known people being like, no, because I don't want to put myself, the child, whatever, through that. And whilst we were saying that it's a clear-cut answer, like, oh yeah, of course you would abort in that situation, it's not as clear-cut.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is, like, I think science needs to make it clear-cut, that this is 99% this is going to happen, and then you can make that decision. But if it's unclear, I don't know what the answer is. Like, I can see both sides of the argument. Like what you're saying, some people might believe that it is not our, we shouldn't have the power to, take that life away. It should be, God should take that life away, or whatever you believe in terms of religion or spirituality or whatever. And then other people, like, the other argument is, let's put it out of its misery because it's not going to have a painless life for like 30 minutes or whatever. So why even go there? And like, why put yourself, like you were saying, why put yourself through all the pain? So I see, but like, I don't know where I stand on this. Like, I see both sides of it. It's very complex.
Yeah, but it's the same argument as an abortion. What I'm curious about is, if you're not on the fence, but if you can see both sides of the argument and you don't know where you stand on this circumstance, what's the difference between this situation and the air quote standard abortion?
It's completely different, because
Why?
there's much more viability percentage-wise of that life being like a normal life and going on to like live a long life, which changes the world, or whatever your life is. It could, like I said, it could be me, it could be you. That's completely different. But if scientifically you know that this child is not going to survive for a day, then I think that's a completely different argument. Like,
but that is life.
But it's a different argument statistically and mathematically. That's like, that puts much more, that makes it easy to make the decision to have an abortion, I believe, because they are statistically different cases. For sure that it's not going to survive anyway, and it's going to have a very, very painful life, and you're going to go through a lot of misery. But you don't know that for a normal inception of life.
But what are you counting as a painful life? For example, you take the pregnancy to full term, they're not able to financially afford a child, as often
adoption.
But that's the thing. We talk about adoption like it's a thing that you give birth and you just ring up social services and they send someone to pick up your baby. That's not how it works, though. It's not this easy solution that you're portraying it out to be, or even fostering. It takes years to be registered as a potential adoptive parent. When you actually become a parent, and if you want to give up your child, it's not I'll ring up today and tomorrow they'll find a parent thing. This can take years, so you still have to raise that child in the meantime. Every argument that's been put forward here, we pretty much all of us have said we can see both sides, and what that should tell us is that, well, if you can see both sides of the argument, then just let the woman decide.
Exactly. It comes down to the choice then, isn't it? And being pro-choice, because you don't know individual people's circumstances, what their mental capacity is like, physical capacity, what they're having to deal with on a daily basis. What does it matter to you what an individual person does with their life?
Every person knows
it doesn't affect anyone else but the people that are directly experiencing it.
It affects the person that isn't able to have a say, the voiceless.
It doesn't, because they don't have consciousness yet. It doesn't.
We don't know that, by the way. We know nothing about consciousness.
We don't know the opposite, but we do know that the woman who's pregnant does have consciousness, does have a life, does have all of those risks presented to her. Why does she have less rights than a fetus that maybe has or doesn't have consciousness and can't express it, but she can? And also, again, like we said earlier, if we're going to force someone to carry a pregnancy to term, then why don't we have any assistance for them?
I think assistance, I definitely think the government needs to do something. Because like what happens right now when if you have a child and you can't support it, you don't have enough money to take care of this child, what actually happens like at the moment? Like I don't know.
Nothing happens.
That's the
I-
point. Nothing happens.
Yeah.
Everyone
here
just
and there.
dies.
I'm a single parent. I have a child. I'm happy that I have a child, but raising a child by yourself is incredibly difficult. And even if I was in a relationship and I was raising a child, it would still be difficult financially and emotionally, but that's a choice. If I couldn't afford to raise my child, okay, I could apply for benefits, but you know how little you get, how little support you get, childcare support, etc. It's nearly non-existent, which is why even in our country there are hundreds of thousands of children living under the poverty line. The government doesn't provide for those children. So why should we potentially add more children like that into the mix and give them a shitty life?
And also, it's not just financially, right? Like, for example, finance is often the biggest variant or factor in it, but it could also just be it's born into a broken home and an unloving family. It could be born into a family that doesn't want it. Accidental pregnancy, they're like, no, we don't care.
That could also then lead to the child having problems, and where I think maybe all of us have experienced trauma in some sense, everybody has. That's how generational trauma gets carried down, and we're affected by those things.
I don't think those reasons justify a blanket rule of having abortions, but I do see what you mentioned before about if we see both sides of it, then you might as well let the woman decide. But I still go back to there are potential like good people that come out of this process. I can see like good people being, aborted.
Yeah,
so I don't know where I stand on it.
I understand that.
There is that.
Good people could be aborted, but then so could the next Hitler.
Yeah. Also, the good people that we're talking about, those are hypotheticals. That woman already here could already be one of those good people who goes on to change the world. She's already here, so she should get the choice. And because we're not talking about a blanket rule on abortion, like we're forcing people to have abortions. We're talking about the woman getting to decide for herself based on her circumstances. And because it's not like you would be able to once you decide you're considering an abortion, that you'd have to go and be interviewed by the state so that they would go and find out what your reasons are, and then they'll let you have it.
And also at the moment, again, if you did want to have an abortion in the UK, you still have to get verified by 2 doctors. So that's there's still levels of control there, which I agree, to a certain degree, yes, you have to do it in the safest way possible. But I think what also, and something we've not touched upon, is just because you put these laws in, it's not going to stop abortion. It just means there'll be more back alley abortions.
And dangerous, which is even riskier for the person involved.
More unhygienic ones, because it's not going to stop people doing it, because they know that they don't want to bring this child. They don't want to bring a child into the world for whatever reasons that they might be, shame, financial inability, because they're just not there in their life, because they might not just want children. There's so many variety of reasons. They're just going to do it anyway. It's just going to be done in illegal backstreet ways.
It's a good thing to reflect on, actually, because then it does become literally about life and death. Because in the US, so many women are going to be suffering now and going to extremes to do stuff, probably doing stuff to themselves to get rid of pregnancies. And it's just like the complications of all of those things. And I can't even fathom having to do something like that for myself, and then the mental toll of that, what it would take. I think that's what's greatly underestimated, the mental toll, any of this, whether it's a viable pregnancy, whether it's not, the mental toll that abortion takes on a woman, it's fucking incredible. It's a really, really painful thing. And no one other than that woman is going to know what that feels like for the rest of her life.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But I don't think it, again, that doesn't justify a potential life that's taken.
Okay, so what about all the kids that are here in the world that no one cares about?
That's a different topic. I think they should.
It's not a different topic because it's the same thing. It's pregnancies that have happened and kids have just been left. What about them? Who's taking care of them now?
It doesn't mean we should have killed them, or that we should gun them down now, put them against the wall, and just be like, "Yep, well, no point you being alive now." But I think
so. If you want a child to be alive,
like,
what kind of a life do you want to give them? If that, would you
think
rather that they
should
have a life of suffering?
I think there's a lot of societal issues that need to be dealt with also. With the emphasis,
yes, but until those societal issues have a better plan, this is the world we live in right now. So
I mean, I do agree that if like that illegal ways of like the kind of manual ways of getting rid of a child or whatever, like that's bad news. Like it's not going to be good. So I do think it's probably better to have a clinical abortion. Obviously, yeah, I think that's a good point. That things are going to be done in a incorrect way now. People can go to different states which still allow it. So that's a possibility.
Not everyone can afford to.
They can't afford it, yeah.
This is why you'll get situations where women will carry those pregnancies to term, even if they don't want to, simply because they literally can't afford to go out of state to get an abortion. And then you have yet another unwanted child who's potentially going to grow up in poverty or unloved. And but we're not working at solving the societal problems that that cause these people to fall through the net. So we're just adding more and more unwanted children into the world and uncared for children into the world.
And then those children are just suffering. And I think, like you said, adoption is not an easy process to if you want to adopt a child, that's not an easy process. So even if you can't have children and you want to adopt a child, those children are still in the system. I know from people that have told me they've tried to go down that route and it's not easy. It doesn't matter how much money you've got. So it's still a big problem.
It's ironic because often potential adoptive parents are declined because you're not financially stable enough.
Yeah, exactly.
That the mother that you've just forced to go through the full term of her pregnancy. No one cares about her financial or emotional stability, but there's millions of forms to figure out whether the foster parent is.
That's right.
There's just a level of obvious hypocrisy here. Yeah, and
and then the guilt of the people that have had to give up that child because they couldn't take care of it. You think that they don't think about that every day?
The guilt of killing the child.
I said that. You don't get rid of that guilt either. It's there.
So, but I would rather have the guilt of letting the child go than killing the child. I don't know, like, yeah.
Okay, so I want to put a situation to you. Say you and your girlfriend got pregnant. Would you, forget the biological side of this, would you at this moment where you are right now in life immediately be like, okay, that's fine, give the child to me, I'll raise it, no questions asked, I'll pay for all of it, I'll take all the financial, emotional, I will raise that child, I expect nothing from the mom, I don't expect financial help, I don't expect emotional help?
No, I would see it as a joint responsibility.
Yeah, but what if your girlfriend didn't want to keep the child? They're like, okay, well, you want me to keep it? Fine, I'll carry it to term, but then I'll hand the child over to you because I don't want to raise a child.
That's a discussion that needs to happen between the two people.
But would you do that though? Would you take on that responsibility by yourself?
Deep question here.
Well, this is why it's complex and not.
If you wouldn't take it by yourself, why would you expect someone else to?
I haven't said anything yet. I would have to think about. Like I said, I would have to have the discussion with my girlfriend, and I would have to figure out, like, why do you not want to do this? And I don't know what I would do because, my heart says this is a potential life. Somebody needs to take care of it. That's what my heart says. But you are right that this is a huge responsibility. It's going to change your life. all your plans are just going to go out the window. There's a lot of money involved to take care of this child. Like, yeah, it's a complex problem, but my heart at the moment, I'm not in this situation, but I'm trying to think, if I was in this situation, what I would do. My heart tends more towards, let's try to make this work. That's where I am right now. It would be difficult. Yeah, it would change your whole life, but life sometimes is difficult. And I wouldn't want to ever be in that situation, to be honest.
But often a lot of people are in that situation.
Yeah.
And until you're actually experiencing it, you can't say, well, it's alive, therefore it should be allowed, because as you just said yourself, it's very complex and there are a lot of things to think about. So when you're putting yourself in the situation,
I think I can kind of see the argument for the choice then, like somebody needs to make the choice, you shouldn't be forced to do it. But I think some more research needs to be done on the viability of when is the life conscious and all of that stuff, because if we could figure that out, then
no, scientifically it is not a viable life up until 24 weeks. Scientifically, you're talking about the viability of life. Viability of life is the ability of life to survive on its own, independent. Viability then is at 24 weeks. And that's scientifically speaking, that's not my opinion on whether I agree with it or not. That
viability is different from potential, right?
Yes, that is basically at 24 weeks. If that child was born, it could survive as its own entity because it has internal organs that it needs to survive, which I think maybe is a good good end to the podcast, because otherwise I think we're just going to be going round in circles. I think we're, as much as I'd love to talk about this for hours on end, and I think we could and can, the podcast must end at some point.
I think one point that comes to mind for me is that even though in the UK we have availability for abortion and stuff like that, I think back to what you said in the very beginning about not being complacent about it, is actually quite a scary concept to think that things could change. Because from a law in the US that changed after how many years, I don't know, I can't remember, 50, and now it's completely been reversed. What's to say something in the government here could change as well?
If you wouldn't want the state to force you to carry a child to term and raise that child without any help, then we should accord everyone else that same choice. Let people decide for themselves what's best for them.
For me, I think I guess one thing would be to just also consider the other side of the importance of the potential life. Again, I keep going back to it, but whatever happens in terms of the laws, that this is a potential life, and to treat that with respect from both sides. After all of this conversation, I do see how having the choice is important. And anything, I think these days the government kind of interferes too much in terms of mandating everything, whether it's good for us or not, and they think they know what's the best for literally everyone, and I think that's a bad thing. So I do this conversation is I've kind of tried to focus on one side, I guess, but I do really see the other side of no, it's our bodies, it's our lives. We should be able to make the choices if we're living in a free country.
As we've discussed, it's a complicated issue. It's not black and white. It is a lot of context and special circumstances and individual circumstances that we need to talk about and just think about and discuss. And I think open discussions like this are important. And for me, I think I always find it really interesting and amusing to a certain degree, particularly in the US, that statistically, I think something like 60% of people that are pro-life when it comes to abortions are pro-choice when it comes to vaccines. And the slightly different thing, you're still talking to people, you're talking about people that, things are happening to your body. And I think that summarizes where I think the hypocrisy is. Thanks everyone for joining. I bright and early on a weekend.
Thanks for having us.
We'll have to have what is a heavy topic. So I do appreciate it.
Oh, Mikey, you made it till the end. I'm so happy. Well, listen, if you enjoyed what you heard and you want to hear more, subscribe to the podcast on, wherever you are listening to this. We are on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Deezer, TuneIn, Alexa, you name it, we're there. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on an episode. We also are on Instagram, which houses loads of behind-the-scenes audio snippets, polls, memes, and ways for you to get involved. So go follow us on Bold, Brown and British. That's the handle. And until next time, keep safe, my wonderful samosas.